خلونا نستعد للبانل التالية بعنوان The Dependability Debate Building Data Center for Sovereign AI. والمودريتور لهذه البانل مستر أحمد عبد اللطيف Vice Chairman AIDC Conference Moderator. والبانelists أو السادة الحضور لهذه البانل دكتور محمد خاطر Head of Strategy and Performance University of Cambridge. Mr. Ahmed Hammadi, Senior Director Cloud and Digital Infrastructure eAndEnterprise. Dr. Mohamed Hegazy, Legal Expert. وأخيراً Mr. Ashraf Gouda, Technology Strategic Microsoft. مرحب بكم.
I think we can start now. Welcome again to those joining us or rejoining. This will be the last panel of AIDC. So we're going to wrap up the conference after this. As I said in the briefing this morning, the Expo continues tomorrow, so we have a full day of Expo activities tomorrow. But as far as the panel is concerned, this is going to be the last panel of this year. So hopefully we'll wrap up on a high note. And we chose to end the panel program with this strategic topic of sovereign AI. This is a topic that has been sort of gaining traction across both the media and academia as well as the business community for some time. There are a lot of government interest in this topic, and as we said this morning in the briefing, it carries strategic importance. Simply put, all the models we have seen in the applications we became addicted to using are models developed by predominantly US entities, and the data sets used to train these models were not actually consistent with any local data sets. In other words, if I use ChatGPT today, I'm using a system that was trained on a data set that has nothing to do with the data I interact with daily, the cultural norms, the network relations in the economy, and so on. So hence the need for every country in the world to develop its own sovereign AI to make sure that the model they use to make decisions is consistent with what's already in place in terms of the relationship governing the economy and the society at large. To that end, we chose a distinguished panel today that covers the legal aspects, the operational aspects, as well as the academia and the strategic aspects. So we're really privileged to have the three distinguished gentlemen on the stage, and we're gonna abuse their time as much as possible because we need to actually take advantage of their generosity. To that end, I'm going to start with Dr. Mohamed Khater, who joined us with considerable background. He's a prominent academic professor at Cambridge University, and he comes with a wealth of research in industry and governance across multiple areas of expertise. And the natural place to start is just to establish some background to the audience before we dig into the discussion. So what would be, I mean, assuming we as an economy want to develop a sovereign AI and we actually made the decision that we need this as a strategic imperative, what would be the technical and economic challenges that go into this? Is it, I would imagine this is quite a complex undertaking. So we need your insight as to what can we expect in terms of challenges that we need to overcome and what kind of timeline that this endeavor would take. And then we'll dig deeper into the legal and the operational aspects with the distinguished gentlemen on the panel. So if you can just establish this background, I would really appreciate it.
Sure. Thank you, Ahmed, for the introduction. So if we look at this from a sort of a challenge point of view in terms of the Middle East and Africa, for example, we're already at quite a disadvantage. I would sort of put this into four major points: infrastructure, the cost, the talent, and the national strategy. And you need to have all those four elements come into play in order for us to actually start developing our own sort of models and gain sovereignty over the AI structures that we want to work with. Currently, the area has incredibly low infrastructure. It isn't ready or as competitive as other parts of the world that are actually leaping ahead of us in this particular area. The costs of actually establishing these infrastructures are incredible. and the cost effectiveness in the sense, if we do build, will we have enough applications, data, people using those structures to make them cost efficient is another incredibly important question. The talent in terms of individuals is developing quite well. We're developing sort of capability in the area. But again, one of the major hindrances here is the readiness of the data. So there is data, but is it ready for artificial intelligence? And then last and in no way least is actually the concept of a national strategy for AI, which is for countries, for governments to understand that this is in fact a new industry, that in fact you need to focus on it as an area for development for your economical competitive advantage globally. So ultimately, these, I would say, are the major 4 challenges that you are facing in the Middle East and North Africa in order to start developing our own sort of sovereignty over AI.
Thank you, but if I may have just a quick follow-up before moving on.
Sure.
So what would be the risk of not actually, I mean, let's say we decide to sort of sidestep the whole thing. I'm not going to have a sovereign AI. I decided to just let go of the whole endeavor, save myself a lot of challenges. So what would be the downside? What would be the risk that an economy in the Middle East and Africa would actually have to confront if they actually choose not to actually worry about the whole development and just ignore the sovereign AI dilemma altogether?
I think it's a really good question because it's a risk-reward analysis here, and it's a just-in-case versus just-in-time. So ultimately, if you sort of outsource this, you're applying a just-in-time concept. When I need it, I'll have the latest thing, I'll get it from the Americans, and it'll be done. If you start developing internally, you're applying this just in case I need it, it has to be there. So if you don't develop it, there are about 3 or 4 other risks that you're going to be facing. One is the fact that you won't be controlling the models that are created. So as you said, these models will be created on data from other places, and then you'll be constantly trying to adapt those models to your need. That's one very important thing. The other thing that you're going to face is your data sovereignty, because in order to use these models, you have to supply them with your data. Now, how secure is that, or how dangerous is that when you start applying these models to your data or applying your data to these models, depending on which way you're going to go? Thirdly, you're going to miss out on the economic benefit of actually engaging in that global value chain. You're going to become a consumer as opposed to a producer. And when AI is going to be one of the most important industries in the world, do you just want to be a consumer? So actually, you're going to miss out on that. So this is why I'm saying this is a national strategy. This is something a government has to look at and go, right, where do we want to be in this global value chain moving forward? So I would put these 3 risks as probably the major risks you'd face if you don't start developing your own.
Thank you, sir. I'll move to Dr. Mohamed Hegazy, who's really needs no introduction for anybody who's involved in Egyptian regulations. Dr. Mohamed is a prominent figure in the legal domain as far as information privacy and intellectual property. And I wanted to pick your brain on the following. We keep talking about promoting investments in AI data centers and cloud infrastructure and so on. And some countries are ahead in the Middle East and Africa, some countries are behind. So I just wanted to get your opinion on what kind of weight would you assign to the role of government regulations in promoting investments in infrastructure? Is it just a matter of having the capital, having energy, and that's it? Or is there an element of government regulation that can actually make or break the business case, that can actually make an economy like UAE or Saudi a leader and other economies followers and so on? So what role would you put, or what priority would you assign to government regulations in that space, given that it's a brand new space and nobody really has a playbook, so all the governments are in learning mode? So I just want to have your opinion as clearly as possible, as you taught us, if you will.
Thank you, Ahmed, and allow me to answer in Arabic. Okay. مساء الخير. الحقيقة وإحنا بنتكلم على السياسات الحكومية والتشريعات المرتبطة بالاي داتا سنترز والكلاود، يعني علشان سواء كنا نبقى بنحاول اننا نجذب يعني الاستثمارات في القطاع دوت، او علشان نحاول اننا نشجع على انشاء مثل هذه الصناعة في مصر في مجموعة عريضة الحقيقة من السياسات والتشريعات اللي المفروض أنها تتحط، سواء كانت سياسات مرتبطة بالبيانات والمعلومات والأجهزة والمعدات التكنولوجية، أو سياسات وتشريعات مرتبطة بالإيكو سيستم ككل، سواء كان على مستوى الطاقة، على مستوى أسعار الأراضي، على مستوى الحوافز اللي المفروض أنها تتقدم، على مستوى كمان المزايا اللي من الممكن انه الاي اي داتا سنترز تتعمل، سواء كانت بتتعمل على مستوى الطاقه او على مستوى الطاقه الجديده والمتجدده، ودي نقطه كمان مهمه جدا اننا نبقى بنبص عليها في المجال دوت. ده جزء الحقيقه. الجزء الاخر المرتبط ب السياسات المرتبطه بالتعليم، ودي نقطة من النقط كمان المهمة، لأننا النهاردة وإحنا بنتكلم على نقص الكوادر البشرية اللي بتشتغل في مجالات تكنولوجيا المعلومات وفي مجالات صناعة مراكز البيانات، المفروض كمان إننا نبقى بنبص على الموضوع من إطار استراتيجي على المستوى السياسي وعلى المستوى التشريعي. مهم كمان جدا إنه هذه التشريعات تبقى تشريعات فيها قدر كبير من المرونة، فيها قدر كبير من النظر الحقيقة للمزايا الكبيرة جدا اللي من الممكن انها تتحقق من يعني وجود الاي اي داتا سنترز على الاراضي المصرية. يمكن في السيشن اللي فاتت الحقيقة كان في يعني اشارة كده لأن هناك لجنة بتشتغل على قانون للذكاء الاصطناعي في مصر، وانا من يعني بعض الخبرة في المجال عندي تخوف كبير جدا من هذا القانون في هذا التوقيت. ليه؟ لأنه كلنا شايفين الحالة العامة اللي موجودة، إنه هناك تخوف من استخدامات ال AI بشكل كبير جدا، وبالتالي ده هينعكس على رؤية المشرع وهو بيصيغ الإطار التنظيمي للمسألة، إنه هيبقى إطار تنظيمي مقيد. ودي نقطة الحقيقة من النقط اللي من الممكن إنها تبقى بتحد بشكل كبير جدا من الصناعة دي.
Now, if I may, we can move to Mr. Ahmed Hammadi, who's the operator on stage. Mr. Ahmed joins us from eAndEnterprise, which is an organization that conducts business in multiple markets with quite an international exposure. And right now the industry is going through a transformation, so there is a new class of service providers called AI service providers. Enterprises want to have the relationship with their trusted telecom or information systems provider extended to AI services. So there is an incentive for international operators to start adding AI services, either leasing dedicated GPUs or other kinds of infrastructure services. Given where you sit in Etisalat and looking at the footprint and looking specifically within this conference what's concerned about Middle East and Africa, what issues would you say an operator would have to contend with when they roll out AI services across multiple markets, either from the regulatory side, the legal side, let alone the commercial side, of course, which is also a challenge. So I'm curious to get an operator's perspective as to, you know, what goes into actually rollout of such cutting-edge services in Middle East and Africa.
Shukran, Ahmed. I think part of the answer is in the question itself, which is regulations and laws. So I go back to what Dr. have mentioned just now. I think understanding the regulation is very important. And I mean, given the large number of countries that we operate at, there are different regulations in each country. Regulation related to maybe data protection, how the data is being collected, how the data is being processed, how the data is being stored, and how the data is being transferred. So I think all these regulations, we need to understand them very well. Data transfer cross borders is also very important. We need to understand the framework behind it in every territory we play in. I think in every country also there might be some regulations or rules around specific industries. Government, of course, is one main industry, but I think other industries like finance, like healthcare that are very sensitive. We need to understand also the regulations behind them. The last one, if there is any specific AI regulation where the government might see that certain AI applications could be maybe very high risk and there is a rule behind it. I think this is one aspect of it, but the other aspect is what also Dr. Hegazy have mentioned about the infrastructure itself, and that is vast. If you look at the infrastructure, the readiness of, let's start from the data center itself, whether we have that center, we don't have that center, whether there is access to power in the region that where we need to deploy the AI models, whether there is access to actually computing resources. Is GPU available or not? If GPU is available, is it available from a local service provider, or this is available from maybe hyperscalers that does not help us maybe achieve the sovereign AI that we want to do? Network is very important. Security. Now we're talking about AI, we're talking about a lot of data, and we're talking about very sensitive data. So I think it will be target for maybe cyber attacks. So security is another component. So I think infrastructure in general is very important. Maybe availability of expert resources that needs to be also trained on these AI models. Maybe the localization requirements also, I think that is very important. I mean, we operate in 3 continents. We operate in Asia, Africa, and Europe. There is cultural difference, there is language difference, there is also core values difference. So how much customization you need to do for the AI models that will fit all? I mean, one size doesn't fit all. But at the same time, you need to find maybe the balance between the customization and the standardization in order to have maybe a cost-efficient solution. I think the last one for me would be always the governance itself, and that is very important. I mean, specifically how data is being collected, how data is being transferred, who have access to this data, how the performance of the AI models are being monitored. Do we have the right to audit this or not? I mean, to ensure that it is in line with the compliance that we seek for. And for specific segments like healthcare, which is very important, I think also we need to understand the accountability matrix. I mean, if the AI have decided on something that is very risky, then who's accountable for?
Thank you, sir. I'm going to go back to Dr. Khater, if I may. And again, within the context of discussing developing a sovereign AI for an emerging economy in Middle East and Africa, there has been a lot of concerns in the industry about bias and fairness of AI models, and even several cases of hallucinations as far as the output of existing AIs. So, can we establish some sort of background how this came to be, what went wrong, if you will, if anything? Because again, we're trying to actually develop sovereign AI, so we need to actually take some lessons from the implementations that we see. In other words, how can we, as we develop these sovereign AIs, minimize or maybe prevent bias and ensure fairness, and also have some sort of acceptable mechanism of eliminating hallucinations in the sovereign AI, because it's going to carry entire industries?
Sure. One of the things that we need to really understand at this point is the fact that AI is in its very early stages. As much as we talk about it with a lot of excitement, as if it's this incredible thing that's a highly developed technology, it isn't. This is just the start of a very, very long journey. Having said that, let's look at fairness and bias. Fairness is a relative concept. It's a human concept. It's not a machine concept. And bias, the same thing. So ultimately, depending on how you train those models, you're going to get a sense of fairness as a sense of bias. And training is dependent on ultimately 2 things: data and the models, and testing those models. So ultimately, if you want to start to reduce bias and unfairness, as a sense, then you need to use a set of diverse data. You can't use biased data. You can't use data that's going to come from one source. And if you want to establish some level of fair play, then you've got to test those outcomes in accordance to a benchmarking system that is globally recognized as being fair. And last and in nowhere least is autonomy. Now, there is this also perception that we are building autonomous systems that can operate on their own. Ultimately, AI is not at that level. So ultimately, you need some sort of human oversight of this. So in order to sort of deal with that bias, fairness, and to a great extent, regulate it, you are going to need some kind of human oversight. Now, let me just comment on regulation slightly. One of the most dangerous things to do is to regulate a technology that you don't understand, and also to start regulating something without actually having clarity on what you want to achieve nationally as a country. So, just responding to this, we are trying to regulate AI in Egypt. Please don't. That could be one of the silliest moves you could possibly do that would eliminate the innovativeness of this industry in Egypt. If anything, don't regulate unless you have to, right in the end, when everybody else has and you've learned. And while it also gives you the opportunity to be a free zone for AI, people who want to go and try things and do things and get around regulation, come to Egypt, will help you. Now, commenting on hallucination. Hallucination is a trait of large language models. Large language models have mistakenly now become synonymous to AI. AI is not large language models. And large language models are neither artificial nor intelligent. They are not AI. Now, the premise of a large language model is to hallucinate. Everything that a large language model produces is in fact a hallucination. Some of those hallucinations happen to match reality and some of them don't. Let me give you an example. If you ask a large language model, what is the most common first name? It's going to say Mohamed. If you ask it, what is the most common last name? It's likely to say it's Wang. If you ask it, what is the most common full name? It will tell you it is Mohamed Wang. Now, there are rarely any Mohamed Wangs. The reality is this is a statistical model that builds on the probability of words following one another. So it is a statistical form of a regressional model that uses probability to decide on how words follow one another. That is the definition of hallucination. And large language models are built to be that. Hallucination is never going to be eliminated. There are other forms of artificial intelligence out there, assuming LLMs can be sort of, described as artificial intelligence, that don't suffer from hallucination because they train differently, they deliver differently, but they also have other drawbacks. So deciding on building sovereign AI is about deciding on what that AI is going to be used for, and then understanding that it's not going to be as good as human intelligence in dealing with a lot of things, and therefore there is going to be some level of error. And we need to handle that error. That error can be a hallucination or another form of errors, depending on the model, if that makes sense.
It does. Thank you so much. I'm going to tie the past two replies from Mr. Hammadi and Dr. Khater into a question for Dr. Hegazy. In both replies, we got reference to the regulations regarding cross-border data transfer. And regulations are always, or most of the cases I should say, referred to as a barrier that tells you cannot do something. And of course, as business professionals, we want to do so many things, but we found ourselves in many cases butting heads with, oh, you cannot do that, you cannot have this data. A famous example would be the European Data Privacy GDPR, which restricts what you can do with European citizens' data outside the EU. So I'm curious, can we flip that on its head? Can we view regulations as an enabler for emerging markets to actually, within an acceptable regulatory framework, attract business from cross-border, position themselves as regional hubs, as Dr. Khater said, as a free zone to experimentation and app development and so on? Is there a way for regulations to be an enabler for cross-border AI services rather than just protecting existing boundaries and blocking people from entering into this space?
تمام. طيب يعني دايما الكروس بوردر او يعني نقل البيانات عبر الحدود دايما فيها اشكاليه بالنسبه للدول لوجود حساسيات كبيره جدا فيما يتعلق بنقل البيانات ذات الطبيعه الخاصه او حتى نقل البيانات العاديه. انما هل نقدر نحط اطر مرنه للمساله دي او على الاقل اطر متوافقه مع ما هو موجود في العالم النهارده؟ بالتاكيد يعني نقدر اننا الحقيقه انه القوانين والاطر التنظيميه اللي موجوده تبقى بتراعي الجي دي بي ار او الجنرال داتا بروتكشن ريجوليشن او اللائحه الاوروبيه لحمايه البيانات الشخصيه، باعتبار انها النهارده هي القواعد الذهبيه فيما يتعلق بالبيانات الشخصيه حوالين العالم. ده جزء الحقيقه. انما في جزء تاني مرتبط بالاتفاقيات الثنائيه او الاتفاقيات متعدده الاطراف ما بين بعض الدول بعضها وبعض، ووضع قواعد معينه لنقل البيانات من خلالها، ودي كمان من الممكن انها تبقى بتحصل بشكل كبير جدا. دي الجزء الاخر الحقيقه فيما يتعلق كمان بالبيانات ونقل البيانات عبر الحدود. افترض ان احنا عندنا خطوه استباقيه قبل الكلام دوت فيما يتعلق بالداتا كلاسيفيكيشن او تصنيف البيانات، وايه اللي هنقدر اننا نطلعه وايه اللي مش هنقدر اننا نطلعه. دي كمان نقطه مهمه. الجزء المرتبط كمان بالتعاون الدولي بقى فيما يتعلق بكيفيه مراقبه عمليات الكومبلاينس او الامتثال والاوديت على البيانات اثناء نقلها، وفي حاله وجود اي انتهاكات بتحصل في الدول اللي بيتنقل لها البيانات دي. الحقيقه كمان يعني بنشوف وشفنا بعض الاطر التنظيميه اللي بتسمح بدوت من خلال قواعد التعاون الدولي اللي بتبقى موجوده في اطار الاتفاقيات الخاصه او في اطار القوانين الخاصه بحمايه البيانات ونقل البيانات عبر الحدود. ويمكن عندنا ميزه الحقيقه في مصر انه قانون حمايه البيانات الشخصيه المصري بيسمح الحقيقه بنقل البيانات عبر الحدود، ودي نقله الحقيقه نقله نوعيه. كنا قبل كده ما بنقدرش نطلع على الكلاود، ما نقدرش اننا ننقل بيانات خارج مصر. الحقيقه القانون يعني سمح بدوت بشكل واضح جدا، طبعا مع بعض الضوابط اللي فيها يعني مواكبة كبيرة جدا أو يعني اتفاق كبير جدا مع القواعد الأوروبية في المسألة دي.
Thank you, sir. Going to Mr. Hammadi. I'm not going to ask you about specific details regarding اتصالات because probably there is a lot of confidentiality there, but just a general comment. Does it make sense for global operators to start developing their own AI models and offering services to maybe vertical industries in their footprint? I understand this requires quite an investment, but again, going with the theme of becoming an AI service provider, either on the infrastructure side, selling access to processing units, GPUs, and high bandwidth memories within a data center that's secure. Can we extend this line into the software layer, if you will, and having your own, let's say, Etisalat or Orange or Vodafone AI, and then offering this to your, MNCs or SMEs and so on? Is there a business logic behind this? Is this something that you see other operators piloting or trialing and so on? Again, without revealing what Etisalat is up to.
No, I will not be able to reveal anyway because, I mean, whoever is heading the data and AI is somebody else. I'm from the infrastructure side. But I will give you maybe my personal opinion about it. I think there is definitely a business logic, but this business logic will have its own maybe conditions. I look at it, first of all, from maybe a strategic point of view. First of all, I mean, if you build your own AI models, definitely that will position you maybe differently compared to competition. I think in the area where we have telecommunication and maybe telco services, I think competition is very big, and it makes sense a lot for a group as big as eAnd is to have its own AI model for a specific maybe use cases and industries. I think this is one angle of looking at it. But I will always look at it that, I mean, we have a big, large portfolio of services, cloud, data center, cybersecurity, IoT, and these are our core services. So if I build AI models around this area where I have a competitive edge, then that maybe makes sense. But building AI for something standard that maybe it's already available and for a specific market, maybe this will make, the use of a standardized AI model will make it maybe more relevant and maybe more cost effective, then I wouldn't go that direction. On the contrary, I might maybe partner with those providers and then try to, on top of that, increase the value of the services I add. Maybe I look at professional services, maybe I look at customization, integration, deployment, but not to build AI for everything. No, build AI models for the areas where I have competencies.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Khater, Let's take the Arabic language, for example. There is a lot of activity within developing LLMs for Arabic language. Some of these are sponsored by governments like UAE and Saudi and elsewhere. So there are a number of pilots out there. The question is, how can we as enterprise users or government users or even citizens evaluate or rank these different models? Is there a criteria that tells me that this model is better than this model, I should rely on it more? And part of that is also the interoperability of these models. Is there someone out there who actually established a way to make sure that these systems talk to each other according to a certain protocol, stack, and so on? Because I would imagine some people are already thinking about, maybe chaining these systems together and taking an output from one system into another. But I'm not so sure that the systems actually are aware of this or there are precautions built into place to make sure that these data sets and these models talk to each other according to a predefined sort of API maybe or a protocol stack. So I'm again curious, how can we rank the different systems, or should we just believe that this system is better because the developer says it's better? And how are there any effort to establish some sort of interoperability between these models?
That's a really good question, and I think this is one of the things that the industry is grappling with at the moment. So is there a way of figuring out if a model is better than another model? The short answer is no. Is there interoperability? The short answer is no. But in order to do that, what you need to do is to, first of all, put a performance benchmark. So if you look at the Arabic sort of LLMs, two sort of very easy benchmarks would be how good is it at dealing with sentiment, and how good is it translating? And then you could start ranking the models based on those very simple criteria. You'd look at things like the cost of operating the model and its efficiency, so how many times that is sort of get you the answer correct. And you'd need to do that through some sort of standard data sets, which you would run on all these models and then compare these answers. And last and maybe no way least is also cultural understanding. Now I use these terms very loosely because large language models do not understand. It's your perception of understanding that is at play. So ultimately, sort of looking at those things and comparing those models in this way can sort of give a good reference as to which model is performing better. In terms of interoperability, there are attempts happening at the moment. So the most prominent would be the ISO IEC 23053 for 2022, which was the first attempt to sort of build a single framework that sort of says what an AI model should look like. But again, this is interoperability at the framework level. It's not gone beyond that. Now, there are also elements of attempting to create interoperability or sort of standard data structures like Gaia-X in Europe. There's also an attempt to sort of look at the ethical standings of AI globally and sort of form an AI for good and ethical AI sort of committees in the United Nations and so on. OpenAI is being also an attempt to create this interoperability, but it still hasn't happened yet. And I wouldn't think it's going to happen anytime soon, simply because, one, we are at the competitive state of this landscape. People are competing to get their models out there. People aren't in the cooperative state. Secondly, we're not really clear on what we all define as AI and how AI can be used in different domains. So should we actually create interoperability across domains, within domains? What is AI defined as within this domain and that domain? So there's still no agreement on that. And also, lastly, the rapid innovation that's happening means that nobody has the time to sit down and go, right, we need to do this in a really structured way, all of us together. So ultimately, not there yet, and probably not there for a while until this competitive sort of phase is over and we sit down and go, right, this is what AI is, this is how we need to cooperate, let's move forward and build standard structures.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Hegazy, I'm going to turn to you for a rather tricky question about intellectual property. Now, if I use an AI system, either as an enterprise or a private citizen, an individual user, and I get some output, who owns the intellectual property for that output? Can it be protected? Can it be patented? Depending on the system, of course, there might be some commercial applications for that output. It can drive a certain technical innovation. It can be a design, a blueprint, a modification of an existing, let's say, a IC chip and so on. But the curious point is that we never had somebody does this kind of creative output beside human beings. So establishing intellectual property was a straightforward exercise. Whoever developed the theory or implemented the pilot or applied for the patent automatically gets the IP. Now, within this context, who owns the IP? How can it be protected? Can it be patented? How to establish this ownership in this new sort of AI-driven world?
طيب، يعني السؤال الحقيقة عامل يعني دوشة قانونية كبيرة جدا في العالم النهاردة، مش بس على مسألة الملكية، على مسألة هو مين اللي قال إنه المخرجات أو الخرج بتاع ال AI هو أساساً من إنتاج يعني حتى التطبيق لوحده، تمام، وإنه ما فيهوش انتهاك لأعمال أخرى لأشخاص آخرين. إحنا ال AI applications وطبعاً ال AI data centers يعني هيخلي المشهد أكثر تعقيداً من الناحية القانونية، إنه بيدخل حجم ضخم جدا من البيانات وبيبتدي عمليات التريننج عليها، وبعد كده بنبتدي نشوف يعني الاوتبوت اللي طالع شكله عامل ازاي. قاعدة عامة الحقيقة في الاتفاقيات والقوانين الخاصة بالملكية الفكرية على مستوى العالم إنه دايما المخترع هو شخص طبيعي، المؤلف هو شخص طبيعي. حتى لما بنيجي نقول إنه الشركات هي صاحبة حقوق الملكية الفكرية، فهي صاحبة حقوق الاستغلال المالي، تمام، أو حقوق الطبع والنشر فيما يتعلق بالمنتجات. إنما على مستوى يعني الأعمال الذهنية والفكرية فدايما المؤلف هنا شخص طبيعي. بس احنا الحالة بتاعتنا المؤلف ما هوش شخص طبيعي، المؤلف هو يعني algorithms وسوفت وير وديفايسز وماشينز معينة، تمام، موجودة. أعتقد إنه الحقيقة، وده دايما أنا بقوله بقالي سنين طويلة جدا، إنه تكنولوجيا المعلومات والاتصالات بتغير في قواعد قانونية راسخة، تمام. فأنا متوقع الحقيقة في خلال ال10 سنين اللي جايين إننا نشوف تغيير يعني كبير جدا على مستوى القواعد القانونية المرتبطة بملكية البيانات، قواعد قانونية مرتبطة بملكية المخرجات الخاصة بالذكاء الاصطناعي، ولأي مدى العلاقة أو النسب ما بين المبرمجين اللي هيبقوا شغالين، النسب اللي هتبقى مرتبطة بأصحاب البيانات اللي تم تدريب التطبيقات عليها، والشركة المنتجة في النهاية. إنما مفيش الحقيقة يعني أي تطبيق عملي النهاردة على الأرض بيقول إنه الأوتبوت بتاع ال AI بيتم حمايته باعتبار إنه هو مخرج من مخرجات ال AI، على الرغم من إنه بعض الممارسات العملية لبعض الشركات إنه لما بيطلع مخرج ما بيتقالش إنه ده AI، بيتقال إنه ده من إنتاج الشركة ومبرمجين الشركة أو المخترعين اللي موجودين داخل الكيان، وبيحاولوا إنهم يعني يسجلوه أو يحموه بهذه الطريقة يعني.
طب للتوضيح، لو أنا مثلا شركة سوفت وير وعندي مثلا وليكن 10 مبرمجين، وبعدين جيت انا قررت ان انا افصل 10 مبرمجين وهعتمد، لان الاي اي احد التطبيقات الجذابه جدا بتاعته انه يكتب كود، يكتب سوفت وير، ودي حاجه احسن بكتير حتى من الكواليتي بتاع انه يكتب لي مقاله او حته مزيكا and so on. حضرتك بتقول لي انه لو انا جيت مشيت ال10 مبرمجين دول وجبت سيستم اي اي وكتب لي الكود، انا ما اقدرش احط قواعد ملكيه فكريه لهذا الكود كشركه؟ يعني انا المخرج البرنامج ده عشان ابيعه ما اقدرش اخد حمايه قانونيه للمخرج ده، بينما لو كان عندي 10 بني ادمين كتبوا الكود اقدر؟
لا، هو يعني مش كده بالظبط، بس خليني اقول لك انه هسجله باسم الشركه، بس مش هقدر اقول ان ده من مخرجات الاي اي، يعني ان احنا اللي كتبناه، انا كصاحب الشركه انا اللي كتبته، تمام، وبالتالي بيسجله. امتى بتظهر المشكله؟ بتظهر المشكله من انه تيجي شركة تانية تبتدي انها تنازع في ملكية جزء من الكود اللي تم الاستعانة بيه اثناء عمليات البروجرامينج، تمام. وبالتالي هندخل بقى في منازعة والكود دوت بتاع مين، وانه حصل يعني انفرنجمنت على الكود دوت، وبالتالي يعني هتبقى كيس في الاخر مش يعني مش هتبقى سهلة بالشكل دوت. وطبعا ده يمكن في الكوبي رايت او في السوفت وير الموضوع اسهل. في مساله البيتنتس الموضوع اعقد بكتير، لانه واحنا بنتكلم على الكليمز بتاعه البراءه او عناصر الحمايه الخاصه بالبراءه، احنا بيتم يعني عمل سيرش على مستوى كل قواعد البيانات الخاصه بالبيتنتس حوالين العالم عشان نبقى متاكدين انه ما فيش اي عنصر من هذه العناصر مكرر، علشان يعني الاشتراطات الخاصه بمنح براءه الاختراع الجده والابتكار والقابليه للتطبيق الصناعي.
مفهوم يا فندم. Going back to Mr. Hammadi, how do you protect yourself if you're going to offer infrastructure service and AI infrastructure service to an enterprise? I mean, they can use it for whatever. Some of those uses can be malicious. The output can be, again, infringing on someone's copyright, or can be actually a product that is subversive in nature, destructive, a hacking algorithm, and so on. You own the infrastructure, but you sell the access to the infrastructure according to a certain commercial construct with your enterprise customers. And for obvious reasons, you cannot really monitor what they're doing with your infrastructure. So I'm just curious, how can an operator who's thinking about offering infrastructure services within AI have enough protection or make sure that there are certain guidelines that they have no liability for whatever misuse that can happen over your infrastructure? Curious about your thoughts about this.
Misuse can always happen, Ahmed. I think misuse can always happen for whatever service you sell. I mean, if you go out from the telco and you go out to something else, so I think like real estate, for example, misuse can happen. We always protect ourselves in the contracts itself. So whatever we sign with customers, we put enough clauses that, first of all, takes out the right of the data from the service provider. So the data is owned by the customer himself. We're only providing the infrastructure. We're only providing the computing resources for the end user. But whatever the end user is trying to do, that is his own rights, and that is his own liability. So we try to cover ourselves in the contracts that we sign between ourselves and the customer himself.
Just a quick follow-up. Do you have an SLA for these kinds of services that is part of the contract?
Of course.
What does that look like, the SLA?
No, so the SLA is about availability of the service, is about there is no interruption to the service. The service is always up and running. So related to the support itself, I mean, when the customer logs in ticket, at what point of time we answer him, and then we acknowledge the ticket first of all, and then we have the resolution. So the SLA is again related to the service itself, but not to the data or the act that the customer is doing.
Thank you, sir. Before I move to my final question, do we have any questions from the audience, either in English or Arabic, to the panel?
شكرا جدا على السيشن المفيدة دي جدا. أنا بس كان عندي سؤال، يمكن سؤالي أكتر لدكتور محمد خاطر. كان بيتكلم عن إن إحنا إزاي نقدر نريجوليت ال AI هنا في إيجيبت. أنا بس كان عندي نوت، يعني إن إحنا هنا في مصر يمكن عندنا أكبر R&D centers موجودة للمالتي ناشونال كومبانيز بتشتغل في مجال السوفت وير انجينيرنج بالذات. فامتى انا اقدر اقول ان انا اقدر يعني مش هستخدم الاي اي از ميسيوز، انا اقدر استخدم الاي اي علشان تبقى حاجه تفيد الكومباني او تفيد الشركه نفسها، او ان انا اقدر اطلع منها حاجه تساعدني في المجال اللي انا بشتغل فيه بس.
Dr. Khater, do you need this translated by any chance?
No, I'm good.
Okay.
I appreciate that. أنا هجاوبك بالعربي، أوكي؟ مش قادر أقول إن أنا فاهم السؤال قوي، أوكي؟ فتعالى نمشي فيه واحدة واحدة مع بعض، عشان السؤال ممكن تبص له من 3 جوانب، جانب الكونتكست أو الكونتنت أو البروسيس، تمام؟ في الكونتكست بتاع الحاجة اللي إحنا بنعملها دي صح ولا غلط؟ كويس؟ يعني إحنا بنشتغل على مجموعة من الصور فور إكزامبل، هنعمل فيها موديفيكيشن بشكل معين. فالكونتكست هو modifying particular kinds of images. تمام؟ في وحضرتك طبعا صلح لي من الناحيه القانونيه، في اكيد كونتكست، لانه لما تغير الصوره بالشكل ده contextually legally wrong، ما ينفعش انه يتعمل ب AI او من غير AI. كويس؟ يبقى ده الكونتكستوال اسبكت بتاعها. في الاسبكت بتاع الكونتنت، يعني ايه؟ يعني انا بخلق حاجه كومبليتلي جديده ما اتعملتش قبل كده، وده مدى اذا كانت كويسه او وحشه او قانونيه او غير قانونيه بيعتمد على الامباكت بتاعها، هي بتعمل ايه في النهايه. فاذا كانت بتعمل شيء غير قانوني فهي غير قانونيه، واذا كانت بتعمل شيء قانوني فهي قانونيه. وبعدين في العمليه اللي هي بنسميها البروسيس، اللي هو لما باجي انتج الاي اي ده، انا بنتجه بشكل قانوني او بنتجه بشكل غير قانوني. فده معناه مثلا يا ترى انا كل الاليمنتس اللي محطوطه عندي، الداتا والسوفت وير وكده، مدفوع ثمنه وجاي من مصدر قانوني ولا لا، او الحاجات دي جايه من مصادر غير قانونيه وبتستخدم لصناعه الاي اي. فبالتالي لو قدرت انك انت تبص على الاشياء دي، تقدر ساعتها تبقى عارف اذا كان اللي بيتعمل ده قانوني او غير قانوني، يعني is it for good or not. هل انا كده جاوبت على سؤالك؟ Perfect.
Any other questions? Okay, so my last final question of this very informative panel would be just in 1 minute, again within the context of developing sovereign AI, you know, and again this is the first round of this event, so there is a lot of interest in what we have discussed today, and a lot of stakeholders are really looking forward to some sort of recommendations and to hear what the industry has to say about the future development direction. So in 1 minute for each one, what would be your do and don'ts, just one do and one don'ts for the governments and regulators and technology planners within the Middle East and Africa governments as far as looking at sovereign AI? What would be the number one do that you encourage them to adopt, and the number one don't that you discourage them from thinking about, starting with Dr. Khater and then working towards me?
So my number one do would be get a national strategy for artificial intelligence. This is not part of your digital transformation strategy. This is not part of your telecom strategy. This isn't part of your planning strategy. This is an independent strategy that is horizontal, that impacts everything, and that needs to be looked at very carefully if this country wants to be a contributor to the global value chain in artificial intelligence. It needs a clear strategy for doing that. Don't rush to regulate is my first don't. You don't understand what this technology is about. You don't understand what it's going to impact. You don't understand the various elements of it. Rushing to regulate it could, in fact, hinder innovation. So those would be sort of my very quick do's and don'ts for Egypt specifically, which I hold a very soft spot for. So.
Understood. Thank you, sir. Dr. Hegazy? افعل ولا تفعل.
افعل ولا تفعل. محتاجين الحقيقه اننا يعني نعمل governance اكتر للبيانات. محتاجين نحوكم البيانات بطريقه افضل، محتاجين نطلع سياسات لتصنيف البيانات بشكل افضل، محتاجين نفعل قانون حمايه البيانات الشخصيه، محتاجين نطلع قانون حريه النفاذ للمعلومات. كل القوانين دي الحقيقه مهمه جدا للاي اي بشكل اساسي. متفق جدا مع دكتور خاطر الحقيقه في اننا مش محتاجين اي تقنين للاي اي في المرحله الحاليه، لانه يعني من واقع الخبره التقنين في الايرلي ستيجز دي الحقيقه بتجيب نتائج دايما عكسيه، وبتبقى يعني بارير اكتر من الوضع الحالي. محتاجين كمان نبص على كل الأطر التنظيمية المرتبطة بالاستثمار في تكنولوجيا المعلومات والاتصالات والبنية التحتية اللازمة للاي اي داتا سنترز. اعتقد ان احنا محتاجين اننا نبقى اكثر مرونة فيها من ناحية القواعد، ومن ناحية الأطر التنظيمية تبقى أكثر فاعلية وأكثر جذب للاستثمار والانفتاح على هذه الصناعة.
شكرا جزيلا.
So I think for me, I would look at it from infrastructure point of view. I think alignment has to be there between different entities, especially from the government side. So there has to be maybe a sponsor for setting up an AI-ready infrastructure within any country. And I will take example, maybe Egypt itself. So we have to identify maybe a single unit that will look at infrastructure that will align the infrastructure requirements with all the entities. And then based on that, they will put a plan. For me, the don't will be in the infrastructure. I mean, don't rush, as Dr. Khater have mentioned. I mean, there are definitely some use cases, and there are definitely some, I would say, vendors and cloud providers that are maybe trying to show that there are some maybe AI-ready solutions that are maybe fit for you. I think don't rush. Try to have your strategy clear, and then based on that, you deploy whatever AI models you want.
Thank you, sir. I would like to close by thanking the distinguished panelists for a really lively discussion, Dr. Mohamed Khater, Dr. Mohamed Hegazy, and Mr. Ahmed Hammadi. Thank you so much for your contribution. As I said at the beginning, this concludes our panel program for this first round of the AIDC-EXPO. So we'll see you next round, whether that's in 6 months or 1 year. But the point I would like to ask everyone, if you attended any of the panels that we had over the 3-day agenda, we need your feedback, because this is the first time, unlike Cairo ICT, which is right next door, 28 years, so the formula is understood and everybody knows what to expect. We tried to be as close as possible to what we think would be the requirements of the market in terms of intelligence briefings and panel discussions. However, there is always room for improvement. So there will be a poll going out probably end of this week, early next week, to anybody who registered. But before the poll, go to the LinkedIn and Facebook pages of the event and just leave a comment. Say, I like this, I don't like this, I expected to get that kind of content, I expected to hear more about that or that, because again, this informal kind of impromptu feedback will be very valuable for us. So we want to hear from you, because the next event will be largely shaped by your feedback. It doesn't matter what we think is important, it's what you think is important in your respective organization or industry or country if you're visiting from outside Egypt. That's important. So please take like 5-10 minutes to visit the LinkedIn or Facebook pages and just drop a comment with suggestions, with criticism, because that really would actually help us shape the next round. And with that, I thank you all for your time. I know your times are busy, so we really appreciate you taking the time sitting through 45 minutes of chats and discussions. Hopefully you walk away today with some benefits that you can take it back to your organization. And see you next time. Thank you.